was in March of 2020. I got COVID. Pretty severe case. I ended up being in the hospital for almost 2 months, in ICU for most of that time. My wife took me to emergency on March 22nd or 24th, after being sick at home for about 5 days, unable to walk, talk, couldn't get out of bed, and she just demanded that I go to the hospital, and ended up walking into ER and collapsing. At that point, they put me in, thought I was just dehydrated, and at that time didn't really know much about COVID, or didn't even have tests for COVID. So it was about 4 or 5 days in that they determined I actually did have COVID. And I continuously would be on a roller coaster from good to bad times. Throughout the entire journey of the 2 months in the hospital, I traveled from Mercy in Youngstown, Boardman, to Mercy downtown Youngstown. I was life flighted to Cleveland Clinic. I moved to Edwin Shaw for rehabilitation, and then I was able to come home to Patriot Home Care. Before we get into that, I'll tell you a little bit of background on the particular journey. As much as COVID was devastating for me to get it that early without any treatment protocols or options for really care, everything was experimental at the time. It became a true blessing to me, and you might find that kind of odd to say, but as I was so sick, unable to communicate with my family, no visitors, I was in isolation for that entire time. When I got real sick, I started losing blood. COVID started eating my intestines, causing internal and external ulcers. I had an ulcer in my backside, which they originally thought was a bed sore, which turned out to be tested, and it wasn't a bed sore. It was a COVID ulcer. Same thing that happened on the inside, where it ate up my lower intestines. I began to bleed, and at that point became extremely ill, and they really didn't think I'd make it. Went through 60 units of combined blood, platelets, and plasma during that care time in the hospitals, multiple surgeries, coded one time, and at that point, the future for me looked pretty bleak. And they had called home and said that if by some miracle he does make it, prognosis is pretty bad, so we know you guys are praying, you might want to stop praying. And my wife, with her faith, and my family and friends and everybody with strong faith wouldn't do that. They just kept praying and asking for me to be healed. And like I said, I didn't know that I was that sick, but at the point that I got extremely sick, and the night that I was life flighted, they'd brought me to a conscious level just a little bit to actually ask me if I was ready for the ride. And they brought me on the gurney into the helicopter and began to start the helicopter. I was still on a ventilator, being taken to Cleveland Clinic. Mercy did a wonderful job here. I had some underlying conditions that I needed some special treatment potentially, that I'd requested to have that option. And they were good enough to coordinate, help me get there. So, as it turns out, I experienced a miracle that evening on the way to the hospital between that Thursday night when I had left Mercy in Youngstown to Saturday morning. At that point, I was on dialysis. My heart was failing, my liver, kidneys, everything was shutting down on Thursday night. They'd stabilized me enough to make the transport, but I truly experienced a miracle in healing that night. I had a vision where I had left the room, being in the hospital, and I'd walked into a large wooden, beautiful room, and my dad appeared with my mom next to him. And he said, "Jeff, I know you're really sick, and if you've had enough, it's okay if you want to go." And I couldn't understand where he meant go. So at that moment, Teresa appeared, and the kids behind her, my wife Teresa. And he said, "Jeff, everything's going to be okay. If you want to go, you can go." So I asked him again, "Where do you want me to go? I'm in the hospital." So where do you want me to go? And he said, honestly, Jeff, it's okay. If you've had enough, it's okay. And he said, you can ask Teresa. And she hesitated and she said, yeah, it's okay if you want to go. But if you can keep fighting, keep fighting. And I said, okay. Now I'm a little upset. And I said, where do you want me to go? And my dad said, I think you need to talk to him. And he poured in over my right shoulder. And as I started to turn, I was pulled straight into God's lap. Straight in, sitting on his lap. And at this point, I wasn't Jeff, the 56, 57-year-old now. I was back to being Jeffy, the 5-year-old. And I was wearing a shirt. Kind of emotional. I was in a really bad car wreck when I was 5. And I looked down and I had the same shirt on. And that completed a circle for my whole life, that I knew exactly that God is with me forever. I made it through that. I was put into the ICU in Cleveland Clinic. And while I was with God, he said to me, if you want to come home with me, it's okay. But if you want to stay, it's okay too. And I remember Teresa saying, if you can keep fighting, keep fighting. And that made me think, she wants me. They need me. So I said, are you sure it's okay if I stay? And he chuckled. And he says, you do know who you're talking to, right? And I said, yeah. And I knew exactly who I was with. I was complete peace and comfort. I still want to know where go meant. I kept looking over his shoulder, and I was being hugged like this. And I looked over his shoulder, and I could see where heaven was, and there were stone gates, and I looked like I could go out to him, and there was things going on in the background. Everything was perfect. But again, I remember what Teresa said. So I said, if you're sure it's okay, then I'll stay. And he said, you can stay, or you can come home. You'll do good for me either way. And I was at total peace. And I was amazed. And the next thing I know, it's Saturday morning. I'm in the Cleveland Clinic in ICU. Keep in mind, I was at the end of the road on Thursday night late. This is Saturday morning. I'm off dialysis. I'm off the ventilator. My lungs are clear. I'm practically all the way off oxygen. And I'm doing a Zoom call with my family and friends. So when God steps in and heals you, he has the power to heal you immediately. I still had a lot of things to deal with after that. And I was so excited that I began praying with all the nurses and doctors and anybody that would listen to what happened to me, because I was in complete, utter amazement and joy. After that, I could barely talk, but I would tell everybody what happened that would listen. And some people would say, well, you know, you had a lot of powerful medicine, and delirium is a pretty powerful thing. And I was like, hey, I get it. I totally get that. I dreamed. I thought I was solving COVID. I thought I could fly around the world. I just had to catch certain birds and I could figure it out. All that was, I could play Metallica. I could do all this stuff in my dream. But those are all dreams. This experience was 100% real and life-changing for me. That goes back to the blessing of COVID. The next week, I'm still recovering. My signs continue to improve, everything, and I'm just getting back on track. I didn't have use of my hands, my legs, couldn't walk, couldn't talk barely. And so they were working with me, trying to get me to a position where I could, they said, either go to a rehab center or potentially a nursing home, because I wasn't, able to function with everything. And I definitely didn't want to be in a nursing home. And early on at that point, I said, listen, if I want to go to a rehab facility, you've got to figure out, like, what do I got to do to get there? So I started doing exercises in the bed. I had them fill urinals with water so I could try to get my arms that I couldn't lift to be able to function and be able to pull myself into bed and roll around and just, get back in the game, so to speak. Well, that next week, about 3 o'clock in the morning, I get another vision, and this time coming from my left side. This I'm desperate to go home, by the way. This super fantastic looking gentleman, dark gray suit, dark complected, glasses, just looks fantastic, comes into my room, and he says, I understand you want to go home. I was like you don't believe. Like I, at that moment, thought the CEO of the hospital had came to see me to get me home. And I said, what do I have to do? Like, if you just tell me, I'll do it. This is not much. And I'm like, that was an odd answer. And I was like, yeah, but like, how do I get home? Like, what do I have to do? I figured they were going to have to do paperwork, sign me out. What? And he says, really not a lot of stuff. And I said, well, who are you? Because I started thinking maybe this isn't the CEO coming to get me out of the hospital. And he says, don't worry about that. But you want to get home, right? You want to get out of here. I said, yeah, I really do. I said, what do I have to do? And he says, well, not much, just a couple things, but you could start stopping all talk that God nonsense. Stop praying with the nurses. And I immediately knew who it was. And I said, I know who you are. Leave me alone. I'm not coming with you. I won't follow you. And he said, are you sure? And I said, yeah, I'm sure. I'm not following you. And he faded away. And I stayed up all night. Thought I could make a phone call to my boss in the morning. We have good spiritual connection. He's a strong faith leader, and it's how he ran GBS and under biblical principles of leadership. And I called him the first thing, and I told him what happened. And I thought, I've accomplished it all now. I know I'm going to be okay, and I know I'm going to be coming home soon. Only to find out the next day I wake up, and my vitals went down the tubes. I started bleeding again, and I needed more transfusions. And now I got totally scared, because I thought, what if he really got me last night? I mean, I was literally on the way out the door, doing that good. And now I'm bleeding again, losing blood. Vitals are completely out of whack. All my chemical counts have gone to heck. And I got 8 IVs hooked up to me. And I'm going to be staying at least another week or so. And I'm scared. I'm really scared. I'm now spiritually scared. Well, the next night, same exact time, about 3 o'clock, and I know because I looked at the clock, here he comes again. And he says, I see you're sick again. You still want to go home? And I said, yeah, I want to go home. But I will not follow you. I follow Jesus, and you need to understand that God was there for me with no questions asked. And thousands of people have been praying for me. You're looking for me, and I have to do things for you to help me. So please, I will not follow you, live or die, no matter what. Please leave me alone. He said, are you sure again? I said, I'm sure. Please leave. Leave me alone. And he faded away, and I felt the overwhelming feeling of he respected that and realized that he's not going to get me because I am committed to Jesus.